Welcome to the Soul Dark Romance Stories. The channel will bring you stories of strong bonds, cultural differences, passionate love, and unforgettable dramatic events. If you love interracial love stories and cinematic storytelling, then this is the place for you. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories. The club was hidden beneath an unmarked warehouse near the edge of San Francisco's Chinatown, a place that did not appear on any official map and was never mentioned in polite conversation. From the outside it looked abandoned, but inside it pulsed with low music, amber lights, and the quiet tension of people who understood they were standing in the territory of dangerous men. The room was filled with expensive suits, whispered negotiations, and the smell of strong liquor drifting across polished wood tables. When Kong Dae-rin entered, the entire atmosphere shifted with subtle precision. Conversations softened. Chairs straightened. Even the music seemed to fade beneath the weight of his presence. At 34, Dae-rin ruled one of the most powerful Korean syndicates operating along the West Coast. His reputation had grown from years of ruthless decisions and calculated silence. Tall, sharp-dressed, and calm in a way that unsettled people. He carried the confidence of a man who had never lost control of a room. Across the bar, Zaria Bennett wiped down the polished counter while watching the door through the mirror behind the liquor bottles. She had worked at the club for nearly a year and had learned the most important rule for surviving a place like this. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. At 27, she moved with the practiced calm of someone who understood how to exist in dangerous spaces without attracting attention. But tonight she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The moment Dae-rin approached the bar with two of his lieutenants beside him. Marcus Park, his most trusted advisor, leaned against the counter while the others ordered whiskey. Zaria poured the drinks with steady hands, keeping her eyes lowered in the professional distance expected from someone in her position. Dae-rin barely looked at her as he spoke to Marcus in Korean, his voice calm and dismissive. "Do not worry about the bartender," he said quietly. "The girl will not understand anything we say." Marcus chuckled softly and nodded. A few of the men at the nearby table laughed as well, assuming the same thing he did. Zaria set the final glass on the bar and paused for a moment. The laughter continued for another second before she lifted her eyes and looked directly at Kong Dae-rin. When she spoke, the words flowed in flawless Korean with the unmistakable rhythm of Busan streets. "You still like using your childhood name, do you not, Dae-rin?" The effect was immediate. The laughter stopped. The music seemed to fade beneath the sudden silence spreading across the room. Marcus blinked in shock, nearly knocking his glass over. One of the other men stared at her as if he had just seen a ghost. Only family members had ever called him that. Dae-rin did not move for several seconds. His dark eyes locked onto hers, studying her face with slow, careful intensity. Surprise flickered across his expression before settling into something far more unsettling. Curiosity. Dangerous curiosity. He straightened slightly, resting one hand on the bar as he examined her like a puzzle that refused to make sense. No bartender from Oakland should know the name his mother had whispered to him when he was a boy in Busan. The room remained frozen while every person waited for the explosion that usually followed when someone crossed Kong Dae-rin. But it never came. Instead, he spoke quietly to Marcus without taking his eyes off the woman behind the counter. "Find out who she is." Marcus nodded immediately. Dae-rin turned toward the exit without another word, leaving the club wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than fear. Behind the bar, Zaria Bennett finally released the breath she had been holding, knowing the moment she had just created would change everything. For the rest of that night, Kong Dae-rin said very little. He returned to the private room above the club where business was usually conducted and listened while Marcus Park reviewed shipment routes and territory disputes. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. Every few minutes, the image of the bartender resurfaced in his thoughts. Her calm voice. The Busan dialect that sounded too natural to be learned from a classroom. And most of all, the name she had spoken so casually. Dae-rin. No one outside his family had called him that since he left Korea nearly 20 years earlier. It had been the name his mother used when he was still a small boy running through narrow alleyways. In Busan, the name disappeared the moment his father decided he would grow up in America and inherit the family business. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus closed the folder on the table and looked across the room. "Sir, you have barely heard a word I said tonight." Dae-rin leaned back in his chair, the low city lights from the windows casting shadows across his face. "Tell me about the bartender." Marcus had expected the question. "I started looking into her the moment you left the club. Her name is Zaria Bennett, 27 years old, born in Oakland. Mother died when she was young. Father passed away when he was 15. She has worked several service jobs around the Bay Area since then. Nothing criminal. Nothing that connects her to our world." Dae-rin listened quietly, but something in Marcus's tone made him suspicious. "That is not the whole story." Marcus hesitated before continuing. "It becomes strange when we look earlier than that. Most of her records before age 15 are missing. School files begin suddenly in high school. Medical records appear the same year. It is as if her entire childhood simply disappeared before that point." Dae-rin's eyes narrowed slightly. "People do not erase their childhood for no reason." Marcus nodded. "I thought the same thing. Which is why I checked immigration records, Korean community databases, and private registries. Nothing connects her to Korea. According to every official document, she has never left the United States." Dae-rin stood slowly and walked toward the wide glass windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city lights shimmered across the dark water while cargo ships moved slowly through the harbor. Channels. Yet his thoughts were fixed on a single moment inside that club. "She knew my childhood name." Marcus followed his gaze. "That is impossible unless someone told her." "Exactly." Dae-rin turned back toward him. "Bring her to me." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "You want her brought here tonight?" "Yes. But listen carefully. Do not frighten her. Do not touch her unless necessary. I only want to speak with her." Marcus nodded and left the room without another question. Nearly 2 hours later, Zaria Bennett stepped out of the club's staff in trance onto a quiet alley. Behind the building, the cold coastal air wrapped around her as she pulled her jacket closer and began walking toward the main street. She had barely taken 10 steps before a black sedan rolled slowly to a stop beside her. Marcus Park stepped out of the passenger's side and offered a calm, polite smile. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Kong would like to have a conversation with you." Zaria studied him carefully. She had expected this moment ever since she spoke the name inside the club. "And if I refuse?" Marcus shrugged slightly. "Then the conversation will happen somewhere less comfortable." Zaria looked at the car for a moment before opening the door herself and sliding into the back seat. The ride across the city was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the low vibration of the engine. When the car finally stopped inside a private underground garage beneath a luxury tower downtown, Zaria stepped out without hesitation. Marcus guided her through a secured elevator that rose quickly toward the upper floors. When the doors opened, she entered a massive penthouse surrounded by glass walls and dim golden lighting. Kong Dae-rin stood near the far window with his hands in his pockets, looking out over the sleeping city below. He turned slowly when he heard them enter. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he gestured toward a chair near the dining table. "Sit." Zaria remained standing. "I prefer to stand." A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. Still confident. "Good." He walked toward her with the slow, measured steps of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "Let us begin with something simple. Who told you that name?" "My father." The answer came without hesitation. Dae-rin's expression sharpened. "Your father was Korean?" "No." "Then he lived in Korea?" "Yes. Busan. For many years before he came to America." Dae-rin circled her slowly, studying every detail of her posture and expression. "What was his name?" Zaria met his eyes calmly. "A man you once knew." The room grew quiet again. Dae-rin felt the first real flicker of tension move through him. "And why would a man I knew teach his daughter my childhood name?" Zaria's voice softened slightly. "Because he once saved your life." Marcus shifted uneasily near the door, while Dae-rin stopped walking altogether. Memories from long ago flickered across his mind. A narrow alley in Busan. Gunfire echoing between concrete walls. A strong arm pulling him behind a steel dumpster just before bullets tore through the air where he had been standing. The man's face had been blurred by smoke and chaos. But the memory of that moment had never completely disappeared. Dae-rin looked back at Zarya with new intensity. Who exactly was your father? She took a slow breath before answering. A man your family later executed for betrayal. Zarya's words settled into the room like a slow-moving shadow. Kang Dae-rin did not respond immediately. The silence stretched between them while the distant lights of San Francisco flickered across the glass walls of the penthouse. A man your family executed for betrayal. The sentence repeated itself in his mind with unsettling clarity. For years he had been told that the man who once saved him in Busan had later betrayed the Kang family. That was the official story repeated by his father and every loyal lieutenant in the organization. A traitor had to die. That was the law his father believed in more than anything else. Kang Dae-rin did not touch the USB drive for several seconds. The small black device rested on the marble table between them like a piece of evidence from a crime. Scene neither of them could yet understand. Outside the penthouse windows, San Francisco shimmered under a blanket of midnight lights. But inside the room the air felt thick and unmoving. Finally Dae-rin reached forward and picked up the drive. His fingers turned it slowly as if weighing its truth before even seeing the contents. Marcus brought a laptop from the office without being asked and placed it on the table. No one spoke while the device was connected. The screen flickered to life and a series of folders appeared, each labeled with dates from more than 20 years earlier. Shipping manifests, financial ledgers, video recordings. Zarya stood silently while Dae-rin opened the first file. Grainy security footage filled the screen. A warehouse corridor in Busan. Several frightened young women being led from a shipping container by armed men. The camera angle shifted slightly, revealing a second recording taken from behind stacked cargo crates. A man's quiet voice whispered container numbers and dates in Korean. Dae-rin froze. He recognized that voice immediately. It was Park Min-jae documenting what he had discovered. Another video began automatically. This one showed a meeting inside a private office. Dae-rin watched his own father sitting at a desk while two men discussed delivery schedules and payments connected to foreign recruitment agencies. One of the men used a phrase that made the room feel suddenly colder. Inventory must arrive before the weekend buyers. Dae-rin's jaw tightened as the realization spread through him. The files continued one after another, each revealing pieces of an operation far darker than anything he had imagined growing up. Containers disguised as textile shipments. Fake work visas prepared through shell companies. Payments moving through offshore accounts linked directly to companies owned by the Kang organization. Zarya watched him carefully while he absorbed the truth. Her voice remained calm when she finally spoke. My father never intended to steal anything from your family. The $12 million everyone said he took was the money your father made from that operation. He moved it into hidden accounts so the transactions could not be erased. He planned to turn everything over to investigators once he collected enough proof. Dae-rin did not look up from the screen. The video now showed a warehouse loading dock during a stormy night. Park Min-jae appeared briefly in the corner of the frame, speaking urgently into the camera. If anything happens to me, this evidence must survive. The girls deserve justice. The recording cut abruptly. Dae-rin leaned back slowly, the chair scraping against the floor in the quiet room. For the first time in his adult life, he felt the foundation of his identity begin to crack. The man he had spent years honoring as a brilliant and ruthless leader had built his empire on the suffering of innocent women. And the man he believed betrayed the family had died trying to expose that truth. Zarya stepped closer to the table. Your brother discovered the recordings before my father could leave Busan. He came to the port warehouse with 3 armed men. My father tried to explain what he found. Your brother did not listen. Dae-rin closed the laptop slowly, already knowing what she would say next. They fought. My father defended himself. Your brother died during the struggle. She paused before finishing the sentence that had shaped both their lives. Your father called it murder and ordered the execution before anyone could question what really happened. Dae-rin pressed his hands against the table as the memory of that night returned in vivid detail. The warehouse lights. The crowd of men standing in silence. Park Min-jae tied to a chair while his father announced the punishment for betrayal. He remembered the calm look on the man's face. Not fear. Not anger. only a quiet acceptance. Rin had believed that expression meant guilt. Now he understood it had been something else entirely. He straightened slowly and walked back toward the window overlooking the bay. The dark water reflected fragments of city light that seemed to tremble with the movement of the tide. For years he had carried the weight of revenge for his brother's death. Every violent decision he made as a leader of the organization had been justified by that story. But if the story itself was a lie, then everything built upon it had been a lie as well. Zarya spoke again, her voice softer now. My father knew he would probably die after exposing the operation, but he refused to stay silent. He told me once that the only thing worse than monsters are the people who know the truth and look away. Rin remained facing the window while the words settled around him. In the distance, a foghorn echoed across the harbor, long and low, like a warning carried through the night. Marcus finally spoke from behind them. Sir, if these records are real, the entire organization is exposed. Every rival group, every federal agency, every journalist would destroy us the moment this information becomes public. Rin did not respond immediately. He watched the lights on the water for several more seconds before turning back toward the table. His expression had changed. The cold certainty that once defined him was gone, replaced by something heavier but clearer. My father built this empire on a lie, he said quietly. Zarya studied his face, unsure which direction his thoughts would take him. For a moment she wondered if he would choose to bury the truth, just as his father had. Instead he reached forward, picked up the USB drive again, and closed his hand around it. Then the lie ends with me. Rin stood in silence for a long time after the words left his mouth. The lie ends with me. The sentence carried more weight than any command he had ever given. For years he had ruled his organization with calculated precision, believing every violent decision was justified by loyalty to his family. Now the foundation beneath that loyalty had collapsed. The empire his father built was not a legacy of strength. It was a machine that had quietly destroyed lives. Zarya Bennett watched him carefully from across the room, unsure whether the realization would break him or transform him. Outside the windows, the first pale hints of dawn began to appear over the bay, turning the dark water into a shifting surface of silver light. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice cautious. If you release this evidence, the government will dismantle everything connected to the Kong organization. Your businesses, your alliances, every operation we control along the coast. Rin nodded slowly, as if he had already accepted the consequences. Then that is exactly what will happen. Marcus studied him in disbelief. Sir, you are talking about destroying your own empire. Rin turned from the window and placed the USB drive carefully on the table. My father built power by turning people into cargo. I will not protect that legacy. Zarya felt something loosen quietly inside her chest. For years she had carried the anger of losing her father while the truth about his death remained buried. Seeing Rin choose a different path felt almost unreal. What happens now? She asked quietly. Rin met her gaze with a calm seriousness she had not seen before. Now we finish what your father started. Within weeks the evidence from the drive reached investigators, journalists, and federal authorities. The story exploded across headlines throughout the country. Hidden trafficking routes, corrupt shipping companies, financial networks that had moved millions through the West Coast for decades. Arrests followed quickly. Former allies of the Kong organization vanished overnight or turned themselves in before. Investigators reached them. Warehouses were raided. Containers were opened. Women who had been trapped inside the system for years were finally brought into the light. Through it all, Rin remained publicly silent, quietly dissolving what remained of his father's criminal operations and transferring his legitimate businesses into transparent ownership. Months later, the hidden club beneath the warehouse stood empty. The music was gone, the lights were dark, and the rooms that once carried whispers of power had been stripped bare. Rin stood outside the building beside Zarya as the sun set across the water. The wind moved softly through the quiet street where the organization had once ruled. Your father saved my life once when I was a boy, Rin said after a long silence. Zarya nodded gently. He told me that story many times. Rin looked toward the fading light across the bay. Today he saved it again. Zarya followed his gaze and felt the long weight of the past begin to ease. For the first time in years, neither of them was standing inside the shadow of the men who had shaped their lives. The cycle of betrayal, revenge, and silence had finally ended. And in the quiet that followed, something new had begun. As the sun disappeared behind the San Francisco skyline, Kong Dae-rin and Zarya Bennett stood quietly beside the empty street where the old club once controlled the shadows of the city. The past that had tied their families together through lies, betrayal, and violence was finally over. Two fathers had made impossible choices, and those choices had shaped the lives of their children in ways neither of them could escape. Yet in the end, the truth did something stronger than revenge ever could. It ended the cycle. Somewhere out there, lives were being rebuilt because one man chose to expose the darkness and another chose to finish the fight. And sometimes that is how history changes, not through power, but through courage. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful drama. Like this video if you believe the truth always finds a way to rise. And in the comments, tell me what you think. Could you forgive someone connected to your past like Zarya did? I read every comment, and I would love to hear your thoughts.